Welcome everybody. So today I have here a brand new movie review. This is going to be one of those classic movie reviews. And if you see an image of Jaws behind me, that is the movie that we're going to be reviewing today. And so Jaws is one of these movies that I don't think comes around quite so often anymore. This is one of those revolutionary movies that pretty much scared the shit out of everybody that saw this in 1975 and certainly scared a generation after that, including myself. I watched this movie when I was pretty young. This movie terrified the shit out of me in much the same way that it terrified attitudes before me. This movie came out in 1975 and this was directed by Steven Spielberg. This was one of Steven Spielberg's earlier films where, the studios didn't really have that much faith in Steven Spielberg. They pretty much didn't have faith that he was able to deliver a really terrifying movie, and I think that due to the fact that this movie was a huge success for Spielberg, this allowed him to kind of open the doors for other films such as Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, and a lot of other films to come. This is one of those movies that I think I really do love a lot. It's one of those movies that I think should be studied in film classes and critiqued in movie reviews, and I think is one of those movies that if we do not appreciate sort of where this movie came in terms of the technological factor, especially with the fact that, this movie had a lot of production problems, including a mechanical shark on set. This mechanical shark was built for this movie because Steven Spielberg really did want to utilize, mechanical shark just because of the fact that they were able to kind of control the shark, so they thought while it was underneath the water and everything, and they could utilize that to their advantage so that they could show more of the creature as throughout the film. And this movie is, one of those films that I think has a really great cast to it. You've got Roy Schneider, who plays Chief Detective Brody. You've got Richard Dreyfuss, who is Hooper, and both these characters are pretty much the characters that you see through the lens of. You first find out the horrors of what the shark is capable of in the beginning of the film when it attacks this young couple that is pretty much out there, and they are skinny dipping in the ocean. The male of the couple goes back up shore and the female goes out to swim towards the buoy. The male eventually falls asleep, and that's when you see sort of the first shark attack. This shark attack is pretty terrifying because this woman is pretty vulnerable. She's nude, she's out in the middle of the ocean. Her male companion is also on the beach and pretty much resting at this point, and so she's pretty much being dragged around the water and everything in sort of a horrifying fashion, and then she's pretty much brought underneath the ocean, and that's when you see sort of a pool of blood come out from underneath the water. This movie has a pretty big Alfred Hitchcock feel to it just because of the fact that they're not showing much of the creature due to the limitations that they had on the set. This movie is inspired by Alfred Hitchcock in the same way that Steven Spielberg kind of grew up watching Alfred Hitchcock movies, even being on a set of one of Alfred Hitchcock's films, due to the fact that he kind of snuck up on set when he was a kid. Steven Spielberg was known for pretty much going to Universal Studios and kind of setting up shop and watching other filmmakers and stuff like that, and that's kind of how he got his break into the business, is by sneaking into the studios and stuff like that. And I think that this movie really taught him a lot about filmmaking, so much so that he would use some of these similar techniques, especially using animatronics and things like Jurassic Park and even Indiana Jones and stuff like that for some of his later films. And I really do like the fact that this movie utilizes a lot of practical filmmaking, a lot of practical effects, especially with the mechanical shark, and utilizing pretty much real locations. This movie was shot on Martha's Vineyard for Amity Island. Amity Island is this sort of Disney-like sort of tourist trap, and if people do not go out to the beaches on Amity Island, that doesn't bring people to come see this place, that doesn't people to come buy products and stuff in the restaurants and sort of the beachfront, shops. And if that doesn't happen, then people don't want to live there. If people don't want to live there, then pretty much the island is useless. And that's what the mayor is pretty much about, is kind of controlling sort of the notion that this is an unsafe location. Chief Brody wants to just pretty much protect his children. He's a family man, and he knows what the shark's capable of from what he's seen when the young woman was kind of washed up on shore, and the guys pretty much kind of telling him what happened. That's when they call in sort of a town meeting. They try and figure out how they're going to deal with this situation, how they're going to deal with sort of the shark attacks and stuff like that. Chief Brody is like, I want a quarantine of the island. I don't want anybody to go into the waters. I pretty much want everybody to stay on land. You get that really cool sequence where you first sort of see another shark attack scene, and this time you kind of get sort of a little bit more of the shark. You see sort of the dorsal fin of the shark as it's kind of moving through water. Chief Brody is pretty much sitting on the beach. He's with his family, and the mayor is trying to kind of coax people to go into the water and everything because he wants people to kind of enjoy themselves and have a good time. And Chief Brody also wants people to have a good time, but in a different manner. And some of the members of his own family kind of disregard his orders, and they actually go into the ocean with sort of a canoe, and even that canoe is pretty much attacked and overturned. That's when you see sort of his family members see the full-on scale of the shark. You kind of get that really cool POV shot of sort of the camera moving through the water as you kind of see through Jaws' point of view. You also get that sort of horrifying ambient music that's really iconic to this day. Like whenever you hear that sort of Jaws theme, everybody can pretty much tell that this is a sort of Jaws film. And I think a lot of the movies that came after this, especially things like Deep Blue Sea, especially things like, The Meg, especially things like Lake Placid, was basically like a giant alligator attack film, really utilized sort of the musical cues and sort of the sort of story elements to kind of reveal solely the element of the creature that is pretty much going after people one by one. And I think Blake Snyder, if you haven't read the book Save the Cat or Save the Cat Strikes Back, it pretty much goes into creating characters for the film industry, and especially if you're a screenwriter, you're definitely going to want to read that book. But he pretty much compares Alien and Jaws to a monster in the house scenario where you've got sort of a sort of singular monster that's going after a group of people, and Jaws is no exception. Jaws is pretty much a creature creature that is hunting down people Predator style or Alien style, one by one picking off people to the point where it becomes sort of a serious threat. And this is no exception. That beach scene, everybody pretty much becomes under attack, especially this young kid who goes out into the ocean, and this mother is trying to, watch out for her child, and he's pretty much under the threat of Jaws. And Jaws, the mechanical shark itself, is kind of given the name Bruce, which I think is kind of funny that they kind of humanize the shark a little bit while they're filming due to so many of the problems they had, especially the limitations with the technology, electronics that they had inside the shark always malfunctioned. The shark, kind of sank a couple of times while they're filming. Steven Spielberg wasn't sure if the shark was even going to perform well under these circumstances, so he had to change a lot of sort of the film in pre-production and even post-production, to the point where he kind of had to basically reveal less of the shark as time went on. And I think that's some of the ingenuity of this film, where you don't really show much of the monster. And there's several really cool action sequences that take place within this film. There's that scene in the beginning where you see sort of the couple that get kind of killed by the shark. You get that second sort of beach attack sequence, sort of the canoe sequence where Chief Brody's own children are pretty much coming under attack. There's also that sequence where they're firing off harpoons and stuff like that to kind of launch these tracking buoys and stuff on the shark, and it's just dragging them underneath the water, and eventually it's dragging the orca along with it, so they have to pretty much cut the cable with that, otherwise they're going to be pretty much drowned in the ocean. And that sequence itself is pretty funny, just because people keep falling down and stuff like that. They're trying to take control of the situation, and it's not working to sort of the mass that is this giant shark. And sort of there's also this really horrifying sequence in this film that really scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. I think it's that sequence where you see Richard Dreyfuss's character, he's pretty much suited up in sort of scuba gear. He goes underwater and stuff like that to kind of investigate the shipwreck. The shipwreck has a giant hole in it because the shark apparently attacked it a long time ago, and there's a bunch of dead bodies and stuff like that, and one of the dead bodies actually kind of pops out of this hole, and it really terrified the crap out of me when I saw that sequence as a kid. And this was way before, jump scares became sort of a thing. I really hate jump scares in movies, but this is the one time, because this is the first time it ever happened, that I kind of forgive Steven Spielberg for putting in jump scares, because this one actually kind of worked, not just sort of a cheap gimmick just to kind of give out a scare, which I think a lot of these movies do nowadays, just to try and fake you out, kind of drag on the scene a little bit, and then they kind of give like a sound that kind of just jumps you out of your scene. I don't like that when movies do that. I think it's a really cheap sort of bullshit tactic that filmmakers use nowadays that's not scary, because in these movies, it's not what you see that's scary, it's what you don't see. And this movie really relies on Alfred Hitchcock style of filmmaking. Like I said before, Alfred Hitchcock is pretty much the thing that inspired Steven Spielberg, in much the same way that this movie was a lot inspired by Captain Ahab, because Quint, you first see him in this film and he's kind of scratching his head along the chalkboard. His fingers are kind of dragging on there, and you get that sequence where everybody's kind of just like having their gears grinded because he is doing that and trying to get their attention. And you kind of get the backstory of Quint along this film, that he was a part of the USS Indianapolis and his ship kind of came under threat. They kind of jumped overboard because they were being bombed and everything. The sharks are kind of come after him and his crew, and he's telling this horrifying story. And I think to this day it's one of those scenes where when I watch it, I think it's pretty cool that you kind of develop his character along the way, and you kind of see sort of the gradual madness that he's kind of feeling because he's trying to avenge his crew that were attacked by sharks, and something that still haunts him even to this day. And one of the main reasons why he wanted to help out the people of Amity Island, because he wanted to make sure that nobody else kind of came along sort of this threat. And I think that you kind of see that he is a lot like Captain Ahab, where he's trying to kill this giant whale, and he's almost driven to the point of madness because his crew is coming underneath a similar threat, and is pretty much being picked off one by one. And so I think due to the nature of the story, the fact that there's a lot of really cool action sequences, that there's a lot of really cool one-liners. The one-liners in this film, like you're going to need a bigger boat. At the ending of the film where you see sort of Roy Schneider, he's throwing chum into the ocean trying to sort of draw the shark to them. And you actually get to see sort of the head of the mechanical shark Bruce come out of the ocean and stuff and nearly bite the hand off of Roy Schneider, and that's when you kind of see sort of the threat. I think that's sort of scene that's kind of parodied throughout movies even in this day. Movies like The Fast and the Furious kind of quote it. Other pieces in modern filmmaking, television kind of parody that. So I think that the rewatchability factor is definitely there. When I'm trying to grade these movies, I look towards rewatchability factor. And this is one of those films, like I said before, that when I'm sick, when I'm not feeling good, when I kind of just want to escape reality for a little bit and kind of watch a really fun, entertaining sort of horror film, I turn to Jaws, because, it has those great characters, it has great ambient music, the sort of Jaws theme that's really iconic even this day. Whenever I go to Universal Studios and that song's kind of playing, you can kind of understand that that is the Jaws theme. And I think that that is one of those themes that I think that's going to be a timeless classic along with this story itself, because eventually they do kill the shark in that epic sort of fashion where they shove sort of the tank into the shark's mouth. You see Quint facing off the shark mano a mano, and you see him kind of taking out the shark with a machete, and eventually gets killed. And Roy Schneider's character fires a harpoon into sort of the propane canister, and it kind of explodes. Now, they did kind of test this on Mythbusters, and they've kind of found out that that scene probably couldn't happen in real life, but due to the fact that this is a movie, you kind of have to suspend your willing suspension of disbelief a little bit so that you can kind of enjoy this film. And such is the case with a lot of movies, especially movies that come out in modern time. Jaws is no exception to that rule. And then you see sort of the shark explode and you see all the guts and stuff kind of flying out. And this scene was kind of also kind of parodied a little bit in Deep Blue Sea, where a similar situation happens where they shove a sort of a tank into a shark and kind of fire a harpoon at it and they kind of watch it explode. That's kind of the similar ending to Deep Blue Sea, which I have not yet reviewed, which I definitely do at one point in time because it is one of my other favorite shark attack films. I think that this movie easily gets an A+. I think that if you're a filmmaker, you should definitely watch this movie. Definitely watch the special features because you'll learn a lot about filmmaking from watching sort of the behind the scenes stuff on things like Jaws and Back to the Future and Jurassic Park and Alien and even all the Predator films, because it will teach you sort of how to create sort of a really interesting horror monster and something that's going to last generations to come. I think that this is one of those films that even after I'm gone, even after my generation has long since passed, that, you know, this movie is going to be studied in film classes and even critiqued in movie reviews and stuff for years to come. And that's why I give, you know, Jaws an A+. I think that this movie definitely deserves it. I think the technological achievements really did pioneer a lot of modern day filmmaking, especially a lot of shark horror thrillers. And I think we wouldn't have gotten movies like 47 Meters Down. We wouldn't have gotten movies like Deep Blue Sea or The Meg without sort of this movie. And I think that unless we don't, you know, watch these sort of movies from the past, even with their sort of limitations in technology, the fact that visual effects, the story, and all that still holds up to this day is a really technological achievement. The fact that it stood the test of times in terms of VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray, and now I think it's even on 4K Blu-ray, if I'm not mistaken. If not, hopefully one day it does come out in 4K Blu-ray. But I think due to the fact that it has survived sort of those formats and is even on streaming service and stuff like that, really shows the tenacity of and the love that, you know, fans have for Jaws. And I think even I myself, whenever I go to Florida or California, even as a child when I was on sort of a boat or something like that in the middle of the ocean, I always wondered kind of what would happen if a giant shark like the one in Jaws, how I would react, you know, if that sort of situation happened. I was pretty much stuck out in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of nowhere, and how I tried to survive. And I think it had a lot to do with that movie, in much the same way that in 1975 it scared the shit out of the people that saw it in the theater. So that's my own personal opinion about Jaws. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this review. I try to keep this review as vague as possible because I do want you guys to go see this movie. I do want you guys to go check this out for yourself, and hopefully you guys end up doing that, and hopefully you guys, you know, learn a thing or two about the movie industry. And as always, guys, rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.